Welcome back, Kwik Brain. Your question for today is, how do you overcome the need to people please, perfectionism, and also paralysis analysis? And have this conversation with you today. We have Dr. Sasha Heinz. She's a developmental psychologist. She's an expert in positive psychology, behavioral change, really the art of and science of getting unstuck. She has her BA, her master's, her PhD at all these amazing Ivy League institutions. And I wanted to bring you on, Dr. Heinz, to talk about this field of adult development.
Yeah.
You know, we hear about, we were talking before we started recording about child development, but development doesn't stop, you know, when you become an adult. And so we all have these issues where we feel sometimes stuck in these areas that we're talking about. You know, we feel the need to be perfect. We get paralyzed because we don't know what to do and how to make a good decision. Some people have a tendency to go out there and just overly please individuals. Where's all that coming from?
It is a great question, which we'll dive into. But I think that we need to rebrand self-help as adult development. We have relegated, I think, the most important task of adulthood, which and frankly of life, of being a human from cradle to grave, is our growth and development over time. And we've relegated in adulthood that task to arguably the cheesiest aisle in the bookstore, right? So, which is to me a tragedy. I think that people are looking for help in humaning, in being an adult, and how to show up differently. They can recognize that they may have patterns like people pleasing and perfectionism, and then of course the paralysis that comes with all of this, and feel like, what's wrong with me? I'm 45 years old. Why can I not speak up to my boss? Why can I not say no to that cocktail party that I actually don't really want to go to? And it seems so childish. And yet we all struggle. Many of us struggle with this. In fact, 60% of adults are not highly functioning in terms of their cognitive framework. So we've got a lot of work to do in terms of our adult development. And I think, people pleasing, paralysis, perfectionism are all symptoms of what we call a socialized mindset. And that is a mental framework that where you're embedded in belief systems where you're looking externally for validation. So you're making sense of the world based on, other people's belief system, what other people have told you to believe. So you're following rules, so to speak, right? Rules of society, rules of your family, rules perhaps of your religion, social norms that you've observed. And it's not to say that we shouldn't follow rules. Like you think of development as, concentric rings of a tree, right? So you need to pass through each developmental stage, just like children, right? We don't want to skip developmental stages. Each is important. But when the problem with that staying stuck in a socialized mindset, we want people to go through that. It's very important to learn how to be a good citizen. It's very important to learn how to be a good team member and to compassionately want to show up for other people and learn how to be a part of, a team. But to be a leader in the world today, we need to evolve from that socialized mindset to a more self-authored mindset where your values and the structure of your ethics are internally derived. So you maybe have the same values, but instead of upholding them because you don't want to disappoint somebody, you uphold them because it's in alignment with who you want to be. And it seems like a very simple little, doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but it's an entire world, it's an entire shift of a perspective. In the same way that, in child development, you look at little kids, and if you go up on an airplane and you're looking out the window and you have two little kids with you, you have a 4-year-old and a 10-year-old, the 4-year-old is going to look out of the window and say, they've become small. The people are small, the cars are small. Okay, but the 10-year-old will say, no, they seem small. They look small. Because the 10-year-old has developed a more sophisticated meaning making system. The 10-year-old can understand, oh, it's a trick of perspective. Because I'm so high, they look small. Whereas a 4-year-old is still thinking, no, what I see is reality. And these, they've now become little micro machines. Remember those little cars? They're like these tiny little cars, right? So all of a sudden, right, they think they can't understand, oh, yeah, they've shifted in terms of how I perceive the size of it. And the same is true in adult development when we're, evolving from a more socialized mindset to a self-authored mindset. It's exactly the same kind of massive cognitive leap that we're taking in our understanding of the world.
So what would be some examples of that as it plays out?
Yeah. So like, for example, with like the people pleasing and the sort of perfectionism example, imagine that you're at work and you didn't get in, you were supposed to do a deck for your group and you didn't get it in time. So the person who was editing it had to work on it over the weekend. Okay. And that person's not pleased about it. A person who is embedded in a socialized mindset, they're going to be very upset and concerned and worried and feel terrible because they've disappointed this other person, and that other person is going to be mad at them. Okay. And that's going to feel very real to that person. It's not wrong, right? But their whole, like, the reason to show up, the reason to do the quote right thing is because I don't want to disappoint somebody else. Someone who has a socialized mindset would have empathy and feel badly for that person to have to work on the weekend and do it. But their core concern would be, I didn't show up in alignment with who I most want to be. They would apologize. They would repair the injury with the other person. But the central concern wouldn't be like, oh my gosh, I'm a disappointment to somebody else. It would be, man, I didn't live up to my own standards of how I want to show up in the world, and how can I mitigate that and maybe create, like, there wouldn't be the shame. You see, like, the shame would be very strong in a socialized mindset, like, right, they're wrong, they've done something very bad, like it's almost like a child being punished. And that shame is such a barrier to growth, because a person with a more self-authored mindset who maybe isn't experiencing the same degree of shame, but still is like, man, I blew it. I didn't show up in alignment with my values, which is to be respectful of other people, to be professional, to be whatever, all of these other, punctual with the work I do. They would be able to sit down and actually get feedback from others, be open to feedback from themselves, and actually sit down and think about, like, okay, how did this go wrong? How did I get myself to a place where I turned this deck in late, right? How can I rectify that for next time? So it's a belief system that's it's just a more sophisticated, nuanced worldview, which is 100% taking into consideration other people's disappointment and recognizing that that may be the case. But the real issue that they perceive is, I didn't, live up to my own self-authored values. And, people pleasing, perfectionism, paralysis, like, that's all occurring when we are looking externally for validation, right? People pleasing is about, let me do what I think you want me to do,
right,
so I can control how you perceive me. Because the most important thing is not how I perceive myself, it's how you perceive me, right? And the same is true with perfectionism, right? It's not about living up to one standard of excellence. It's about, do other people perceive me as excellent? And again, it seems like like a little semantic different, but it's an
No.
entirely different world of development. And you can really see the difference when especially with the way people lead. Socialized mindsets, like, great, it's going to be a great team member, right? They're going to really like show
Mhm.
up and do the work. But if you're in the role of being a leader, that the work of developing into a more into self-authorship is a truly essential part of the work, because you can't lead if you're taking everyone's temperature all the time to find out
Mhm.
how good you are.
And so, how do you, when we're talking about paralysis or people pleasing or the sense of wanting things to be perfect, so we're not perceived as, less than, how do you flip when we're talking about self development, right? Adulthood development.
Mhm.
How do we flip that ownership switch? Like, how come some people seem to have it, right, and other people, are in a different setting, and what are the keys for people to get their agency back?
Right. I mean, I think agency is such a great word. That's exactly what it is, right? It's the ability to be able to define, to self-define, as opposed to be looking to other people to define one's identity.
Mhm.
Um, but I think that it's the interesting thing about development and adulthood is that it's not correlated with age.
Mhm.
So, I can work with a client who's in her 60s, who's struggling with emerging from a socialized mindset, who's
Mhm.
still concerned with, but what would my mom think about this?
Right.
Right. Even at 60 years old, and there could be, a 22-year-old who has already traversed that gauntlet and is much more self-authored in the way they show up and how they engage with the world. So it's interesting that there really is no relationship to age. One would think that there is, but there isn't. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that once we hit 25, there's this notion that once we've reached full physical maturity, that we've reached our full psychological, emotional, and cognitive maturity, and that's just
Right.
not true at all. And there's very little framework, um you know in the adult experience to do this work. Kids go through school, there's milestones, there's they have to show some kind of competence from year to year, and then we've ritualized it that they go from year to year and they've grown and developed, and then in adulthood it's like you're 25 and the idea is like, oh yeah, you're cooked. You're good. But that's not true. We're constantly evolving into more sophisticated meaning making systems. And where someone who isn't riddled with that kind of like paralysis of perfectionism is they have the freedom of their own self-authorship, right? They're not having to, when they're the that writer's block, right? So much of what
Right.
that writer's block is like, not just about I don't know what to say. It's so much anxiety and fear about the anticipation of what are other people going to think about this.
Mm. And a lot of people have that monkey mind. They have that squelcher, that critic
Absolutely.
that's loud. And our mind is
Exactly.
always eavesdropping on that self-talk. So if somebody's is racing on the perfectionism or the people pleasing paralysis, that treadmill, and they can relate to this conversation as they're listening or
Yeah.
watching this. What would your advice be? Because I think people know if you tell them, that they actually have, that they give up their sovereignty or their agency when they make excuses, or when they see themselves more as a victim, that they don't take responsibility for
Hmm.
their thoughts or how they feel. But yet, it's the same thing with a lot of the work in self-help. People will know what to do, but they don't do it, right?
Exactly.
Or they try everything and they're still unhappy for some reason.
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing is just awareness and recognizing like,
Hmm.
okay, because what I see as a problem, and I see this with so many of my clients is, if I had a dime for every time a client comes and says like, oh my gosh, what is wrong with me? Right. That's the first thing they say. What in the world is wrong with me? I mean, I have a nice life and I'm competent in all these other areas. Right. And yet I still do these things. What the heck?
Right.
Well, recognizing that, there's nothing wrong with you. You weren't born defective. You didn't get the wrong, you're not, I mean, right. We all think we're alone on
Right.
the island of misfit toys and somehow like nobody else struggles with this. Everybody struggles with this. This is a central adult task. Everybody struggles with this. Everybody has to go through this, you know, transition, right? Everyone has to go through this developmental phase. So everyone, by the way, unless you don't, which
Yeah.
is problematic in and of itself. So, right, if you don't even develop to a socialized mindset, it's problematic. So, everybody has to go through this. So recognizing first and foremost, like, oh, this is normal.
Hmm.
This is healthy and normal. And, right. So like, let's just remove the big shame duvet that makes it impossible for us to work on anything. And recognizing that like nothing's wrong, nothing's gone wrong. You're not nuts. This is a completely normal adult developmental phase that you want to transition through, and beginning to recognize like, what are your triggers? What are the assumptions that you're making? If the presentation isn't perfect, if I write
Mm.
a blog post with some glaring mistake in it, if I, whatever the concern is, like, if I don't show up impeccably in some way, what am I assuming is the big, bad, terrible outcome, right? That's got me in its grips. And often what people will find is that assumption that's underlying all of this is not sophisticated. It's like, they won't like me.
Mm.
Right. It sounds like something that, my 7-year-old would say to me, but that's because that part of them that is still believing that they haven't, that part of their, inner world hasn't evolved as they've evolved. So they're still sort of like embedded in belief systems that made sense when they were 10.
Right.
Right. And it may have been like, being at a school where there was like, cool table and not cool table. And that was a really defining experience for someone. And
Hmm.
so it like created a framework of like, man, if I'm not accepted in this group, then big, bad, terrible things are going to happen. I'm going to feel all these feelings I don't want to feel. Right. So exploring what are the assumptions that are underlying the drive for perfection and to people please, because of course those behaviors are protective, right?
Right.
You're protecting some inner, some anticipated negative emotion. I don't want to feel vulnerable. Thank you very
Hmm.
much. I don't want to feel shame or, disappointment or whatever the feeling is. So, recognizing what are the assumptions that are at play. Like, first and foremost, there's nothing wrong with me. Secondly, what are the assumptions that are, fueling this behavior? And, just in that alone, beginning to, because what you want to be able to do is dismantle some of these belief systems. I call myself a mindset coach when I work with my clients. It's really because, mindset, all behavioral change is an expression of a mindset change. We can't create sustainable, lasting change without changing the way we think fundamentally, right? So, if we think that, the way to be loved by people is, to perform, to be a performer in some
Hmm.
way, like to, always be achieving, winning, whatever, then, as long as we believe that framework is very real, that nothing's going to change. I don't care how many self-help books you read, right? The work is to actually dismantle that belief system. Like, maybe that's not always true.
And so,
Maybe there's a possibility that someone might actually, appreciate me or love me, even if I don't, you know, perform and achieve.
So we start with self-awareness,
Totally.
because it's, you can't transform something or change something if you're not even consciously aware. Like if you're fueled by, and there's a secondary gain, right? People, it's not only is it a protective mechanism, but you're also, if you're fueled by this feeling that you're not enough, there's certain rewards that come because you're acting, right? And so it might not necessarily be the path to happiness, but maybe if it's driving you to get some kind of results, people rely on it, and maybe that area of their life hasn't developed,
Yeah, I mean, I
as
think
rich
that's
as it could be.
a very interesting point. I mean, I think that often with goal setting, because I do a lot of work on goal setting with my
Mhm.
clients, if when you're goal setting from, that place of it's a should, it's a must, it's an ought to,
Right.
which is like the hallmark of a socialized mindset, right? If there's lots of shoulds in your life, it's an indicator that you're embedded in that belief system. And there's nothing wrong with it. Again, like there's no hierarchical, like it's better. They're all necessary stages of adult development. So there's nothing wrong with it. It's just recognizing where you're at. The problem is that it's very, it's hard to motivate ourselves from a place of should.
Mhm.
And it always ends up feeling like a Pyrrhic victory. So when people accomplish something big and but they kind of at the end of it feel like meh,
Yeah.
right? They've just got to get right back on that treadmill of achievement. And it starts to feel they're just exhausted, right? Like it's because that the goal that they're setting is not necessarily, it's not rooted in an intrinsic desire. It's normally some extrinsically motivated desire. So that's like, achieving a goal for for the sake of something external,
Right.
whether it's like, to, accolades, a sense of, approval, fame, image. Those are all external motivators, and they're powerful, and they can be very powerful. And people
Mhm.
can achieve a lot using that fuel. But it's like it's fuel that burns dirty. It's like burning coal instead of burning clean energy. It's gonna have a lot of there's gonna be a lot of pollution in your life.
And there's a difference between something being attainable, because you're motivated by external stuff to be able to achieve something there, but then also having it sustainable, right?
Definitely.
Over time. And so having that clean energy. Um, what would you what would you say to somebody who's looking to reclaim that ownership or that authorship, as they could write a new chapter in their life every single day, right? In terms of not blaming or not feeling like they're not enough in comparison to what's going on the outside, right? It's like with a lot of people being depressed, this digital depression because they're comparing themselves to everybody else on social media, the highlight trailer.
Yep.
And then the truth is, it's green where you water it. Sometimes it looks greener because the filter they're using, or there's a lot of artificial turf that could be
Right.
online. But when it comes down to it, it's not. I did this tweet the other day. So I said, haters, message to haters. It's not your job to like, love, or respect me. It's mine.
Right.
And so
That's
how?
that's like that's exactly what self-authorship is, right? It's like I get to be I get to define
And then where's the
who I
border
am.
between that and you're not to somebody who's goes from social all the way to solo, and they're not getting feedback, where's the line where people could go extreme and become narcissistic, like where it's driven, yeah, where they're completely isolated. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I mean, I think that the misnomer is that if you're self-authored in some
Hmm.
way, that it's like it's narcissistic in some way. Like I define who I am, and I don't care what you
Right.
think. Okay, not caring what other people think means that you have not actually transitioned through socialization. Like you haven't gone through that developmental stage yet.
Hmm.
Okay, so that's like, we're talking self-sovereign. That's less developed than even being in like a socialized mindset. So I think that it's actually really important to state, self-authorship means that you're incorporating the lessons of what you learned from that socialized mind, and you've evolved it. You've expanded on it. You've seen it, instead of being inside the snow globe, you recognize that you can see that you're now outside the snow globe. You're seeing it, and you're like, you can recognize like, oh, you know what? I actually do like those values. I think they're very useful. I think they're important. They matter to me, but I'm not going to just blindly just assume them because that was the ethos of my family. I'm actually deciding on purpose with autonomy that this is who I want to be and how I want to show up. Right. And so, it's like, it's a little nuance, but it's really important to understand that, when you're for you saying haters, whatever you want to say, it's not to say it doesn't hurt. Of course it hurts. I mean, I can't imagine it like I get things on Instagram too, right? It hurts. It feels uncomfortable. It doesn't feel good to have negative comments or whatever being made. And that is healthy and normal. It's right. That's a normal response. But it is, am I going to allow like my fear of that feedback to direct my behavior, to direct my actions? Or am I going to define, even though it doesn't feel great, how I show up and how I want to proceed and what I'm going to choose to do with my life? Right. So, that is, we're all moving towards a more sophisticated, mature, frankly, mindset. And there's freedom in that, right? There's freedom in being able to shift and see different perspectives and actually expanding the way you see things. It's not so myopic. It's not like, if I, don't have this particular job, then I'm not taken seriously. I mean, like, this is the way that we think about things, right? We've made it all up. we've made all these belief systems up, but they feel very real to us, right? Like, as someone who comes from a family, of a long line of lawyers, and they want to be an artist, or, they want to, work in advertising, I don't know, something different. And the crisis of, will I be taken seriously? Will I be seen as flimsy? Will I not be appreciated within my family structure? Like, that is, it feels very real. Okay. But then when you're looking at it from a more sophisticated perspective, you look at it, you're like, this is completely made up. Like, who cares whether someone is a lawyer or decides to be, a life coach?
Right.
That's what I had to go through. Right. But I mean, I think that is, and practice is, in that capacity, it doesn't matter. Right. It's like, you can recognize that it's all made up, but when you're embedded in it, it feels so real. In the same way that if you're, when you're in that sort of perfectionist paralysis, you're like, if I don't write the perfect blog, even though 4 people are only going to read it, it says something about my worthiness as a human being. That feels so real.
It does.
Right. It's like, it feels so scary and so real. As we can, emerge from that, we can begin to right size it and see it for what it is, which is like, oh, it's actually just a story I told myself. It's just an assumption I made.
So after people are aware of, so self-awareness is so important, right? Self-management also as well. So if people
finding developmental communities, I mean, and I think that that's where we fail people.
Tell me more about that.
We don't have, in adulthood, there aren't really communities that are set up to help people work through these issues. Therapy is a great place to do this kind of work, but we do it alone. And I think what what I find, especially in the groups that I run in Mind Your Mind, so much of the growth and development that's happening is in other people recognizing, oh my gosh, other people also have the same problem. Other people have the same mindset. And because in watching someone else spinning out in their own, embedded little mindset,
Right.
you begin to recognize you are the objective observer of somebody else, and you realize like, oh my gosh, they think it's so real, and you can see it's not real,
Right.
but you can recognize like, but if that was me, I think I'd be in the same boat. I think it'd feel very real to me too. So there's something about being in a community and having the opportunity to observe other people embedded in their own mindsets, in a learning community, and being able to see it for what it is, and then applying that to oneself and recognizing, oh, okay, that same thing is happening to me too. So, learning in the community. And again, with children, we do this. They learn in community. We set up a structure for them to be learning together at school, in on teams, and all sorts of things that they do together to grow and to develop themselves. And in adulthood, we're flying solo. And I think it's very hard to do this work on one's own, right? It is much easier to be in a group environment, or even with a skillful coach or a therapist, to be able to see the belief systems that you're so embedded in, because there is no change without being able to see those. To be able to see, like, we're kind of stuck in our own, in our own stories.
I like what you said about community in terms of being consciously aware of, like, objectively observing other individuals, and they act like a mirror for our own patterns.
Yeah.
And because it's not just our own neurological networks, it's our social networks, certainly,
Totally.
that have they have an effect on the words we use, on the actions we take, on our own thoughts, on our own character, on the habits that we develop. And it's interesting because if people are fueling their life on the opinions of those around them, both positive and negative, then we're eventually going to run out of gas, right? No one has a right to define who you are, and the only opinion that matters about somebody or their dream is ours. And I think we do ourselves a big disservice when we let the noise of other people's opinions and expectations distort our own reality, right? Subvert our own thoughts and drown our own inner voice. And so once you're aware of these things, then you could also introduce doubt in your own mind of the things that, about the assumptions and attitudes we hold around money, or our own potential, who we are in our own career, or health and relationships.
Exactly. Being in community with people that are willing to question assumptions and actively doing so. I think another thing could be really helpful for people is, making sure that you have a group of trusted friends that you've articulated to them, you're my reality check. When I am spinning out in paralysis and I can't make a decision, or, I'm not moving forward on a project because I just can't get myself to sit down and do it because I'm riddled with, that sort of perfectionist, just being stuck in perfectionism. Having someone that you trust, that's a wise voice in your life that you can call and say, like, is this reasonable? Here's my big fear. Here's what I'm assuming. Here's the terrible, bad thing I'm assuming is going to happen. Is this reasonable? And if, most times people will say, like, okay, there may be an aspect of that, like a piece of that might happen, or it might, yeah, you may make a mistake and you may get some feedback that's not all wonderful, but no, the world's not going to end. No, everyone isn't going to hate you. No, your career isn't going to be over, right? So you have someone who's kind of a touchstone of reality, saying, who's not embedded in your, like, as we call it, like treading water in the deep end with you. They're actually on the ledge of the pool watching you tread water, and they're like, hey, I'm going to throw you a lifeline. Like, what you're thinking is actually not that rational. And I love you. And it's not, I understand why you're thinking what you're thinking, but that's not, it doesn't actually make a ton of sense. Like, let's actually play this out. It's not likely to happen, right? There's a really good CBT exercise, which is anyone can do. It takes 5 minutes. It's a great, it's, it's a developmental tool to use. And that is, if you're in that kind of catastrophic thinking or that sense of paralysis, spinning out, can't make a decision, write down what you imagine the worst case scenario is going to be. I mean, truly doomsday. What's the worst thing that you're imagining? Allow yourself to truly go there, the worst thing. And then the next step is write the best possible scenario. What's the best possible outcome? It's very hard for people actually to go there. Interestingly, it's very hard. It's very easy for our brain because of our negativity bias that we can imagine the worst possible outcome in, less than a second, but it takes people some time to actually think about, well, what if this actually went better than I could possibly imagine? What would that look like? And then the third step is, what's the most realistic scenario? Given the worst and the best, what's the most realistic outcome? And it normally leaves you with, it's probably not going to be so catastrophic. And it's probably not going to, be the best thing that ever happened to me, but it's probably going to be okay. It'll probably be fine, right? It'll be a learning experience, a stepping stone to the next thing or whatever. And it gets you kind of over that hump of just, just when you're feeling just stuck and you can't move forward, and it can help you to kind of move beyond that. But that's a perspective. You can think about that exercise in this, from the framework I'm talking about, adult development. It's an exercise to help you gain perspective, right? You're taking the story that you're telling and you're looking at it more objectively from the vantage point of your, more wise, higher self.
I like that a lot. And so people do the worst case scenario, the maybe best case scenario, and then what realistically will happen. And even what you're saying is having that person, that buddy, that family member that call you on your stuff, that's giving you another perspective.
Totally.
Right? Be able
Exactly.
to get
It's
out,
helping
to get
you.
unstuck.
Exactly. It's helping you, they're not embedded in your thoughts and feelings. And so they can really be extremely valuable.
Yeah, I like what you said about imagination, because I feel that worrying is sometimes, or a lot of times, a misuse of our own imagination.
Totally.
We're just rehearsing over and over again, and everything
it's the
that can go
crappiest
wrong.
use of our imagination.
Yeah, very much so. This is amazing. So, Dr. Heinz, what would I would challenge everybody to take a screenshot of this and to post it online. What do you want to ask them if they're going to post something online and tag? Which social media do you use?
Instagram. It's
Instagram.
at DrSashahHeinz. So at Dr.
Perfect.
Sasha Heinz. Yeah.
Amazing. So tag Dr. Heinz, tag myself so we get to see it. And then what do you want them to post? Maybe we could ask them a question or challenge them to do something.
I mean, I think the biggest question always is, allowing yourself, and this is where having a journal or some place that you write, when you get to that place of just can't move forward, you feel stuck. We all have that. We all have moments where that happens. What is the big, bad, terrible fear? What's the big, bad, terrible assumption that you're making? And it doesn't, and don't worry if it doesn't sound, very grown up. It's not. It's going to sound like a 5-year-old, right? They're not going to like me, or I'm going to destroy my career. It's like none of it's rational. It's all, they're not evolved, right? So recognizing like what is the big, bad, terrible fear that you're assuming is going to happen, and that's what has you in its grips. So the first thing is, and once you know what that is, if I can't write this piece, then I'll never be a writer. I'll never be taken seriously, or whatever it is. If I blow this presentation, I'll blow my entire career. Okay. Once we know what that assumption is, then you can start to get some feedback on it, like from trusted individuals, from yourself, in communities that you're in, and having those vulnerable, honest conversations like, does this actually make sense? Probably not.
I love that. And where can people connect with you if they want
Yeah,
to go
so I'm
deeper?
on my preference for social media is Instagram.
Okay.
And so come hang out with me on Instagram. And my website is exactly the same name. So drsashaheinz.com.
Okay.
And we have Mind Your Mind as my adult, although, I was laughing with you. I'm like, it does not sound sexy and cool. Adult development does not necessarily sound that cool. It is so cool. But what Mind Your Mind is exactly that, a framework, a place where I teach this work and help people do that work of developing themselves and transforming their minds.
Mm,
Um, and it's, to me, the most exciting thing in the world is watching people emerge from their own stuckness and finding that sense of freedom on the other side.
I love that. I just got goosebumps. I call them truth bumps. I would recommend everyone follow you on social media. We'll put links to your website, everything in the show notes, as we always do at jimkwik.com/notes. If you're listening to this on Spotify or on iTunes, I highly recommend you watch the entire conversation on the extended version on our YouTube channel. That's where we put all the content above 20 minutes also as well. So there are some real gems there. So if you're just listening to this, if you missed that, then you missed a lot. And what I would recommend is, yeah, everyone go follow Dr. Heinz. Remember that it's not about being perfect; it's about progress, right? It's easy to think about, hey, we need to
100%.
release self-judgment, but in those moments where we start criticizing or being hard on ourselves, maybe we could just pause and just observe ourselves instead. Develop that curiosity, develop that awareness, because the former leads to self-doubt, but the latter leads to self-development, right? And self-awareness.
Absolutely.
So
And
amazing.
this is it. Like, there is no finish line,
Hmm.
right? I mean, I think that's so important. There's no finish line. There's no fixing. It's a process. It's the central process, in my opinion, that
Yeah.
we are asked to wrestle with, in the, experience of being human.
Yeah. I think a lot of it is with self-awareness for me. It's having the curiosity to know ourselves. And then the other part is having the courage to be ourselves
Yep,
also as well.
exactly right.
Amazing, Dr. Heinz. Thank you so much for being on our show.
So much fun to talk to you.
We'll do it again.
All right, awesome.
Hi, Kwik Brain. It's your brain coach. I want to thank you so much for watching this video. 3 things to do. Number 1, make sure you share this, because when you teach something, you get to learn it twice. Update your learning so you can update other people's learning as well. Number 2, make sure you subscribe to this channel so you don't miss a thing, because if you miss a video, you miss a lot. And finally, make sure you hit that bell so you're notified and you find out when we put out the latest and the greatest. One extra thing, if you want really close attention, then text me. Here is my phone number, 310-299-9362. Did you remember that number? 310-299-9362. Shoot me a text and we'll stay in touch. Ask me your burning question. And I wish your days be full of lots of life, lots of love, lots of laughter, and always lots of learning. I'll see you in our next video.